So this week we're going to talk a little bit about evaluating websites, looking at how we can go about judging a site's credibility first and then its value to digital scholarship, hoping to walk you through a couple of sites and give you some information that might be useful when you sit down to do your own critical evaluation of a site. For most of you, doing research probably means going to this page here, Google, and accessing the internet to tap into the phenomenal amount of documentation that's stored there. However, the ubiquity of the web, the ease of access, and the vastness of material available make it imperative to approach this resource with the utmost caution. Clearly, and we've seen this in our own exploration of the web, there are really wonderful examples of digital history out there that are both reliable and useful. But finding these good sites is like trying to find a needle in a haystack. For every site like this one here, visualizing emancipation, which I'll show you later and shows shows the history of emancipation across the South in the United States in a really visual and compelling way. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of sites like The Real Reason for Emancipation, which paints Abraham Lincoln as a racist who had no desire whatsoever to actually free the slaves. And really, it fails to meet even the basic standards of good scholarship. It's evident then that for every true jewel out there on the web, there is a lot of fool's gold. So how do we sift out the real thing? Evaluating a website then in order to determine its scholarship is essential. One should follow a process and apply criteria similar to those that you would use in evaluating any literature, especially print literature. Right? When you look at a web page, it really is no different than looking at books or other media. One still needs to be aware of the web's purpose, its authorship, and really the way that the website is packaged. This question about exploring websites or evaluating websites has been covered pretty heavily by both librarians and historians, and a quick Google search for evaluating websites will pull up hundreds and hundreds of actually very good sites for how to walk through a variety of questions about web, really about web evaluations. In fact, I have my favorites, and I'll put a link to those in D2L. So my favorite evaluating web pages is actually the UC Berkeley Teaching Libraries web evaluation page. I'll link to this in D2L, and it's a really good checklist for basic web techniques. There it starts with an evaluation of the URL, walking you through whether this is a personal page, what kind of domain it comes from, who published it, and why these things matter. From there, it talks about authorship, who wrote the page, whether or not it's updated and maintained, and whether or not the author's credentials are sound. So here you have a way of looking at the validity of the information that's published to that website. And then you look, and then it walks you through how to look for indicators of quality information. So various techniques for web evaluation, looking at footnotes, looking at links, looking at whether or not it's plagiarized, faked, or altered, looking at other resources to make certain that the one you're going to quote or use in your research is good. And then lastly, it asks that you think about what other people are saying about this site. So ultimately, what this set of instructions is doing is walking you through a pretty simple technique for understanding the validity and credibility of a website. The kind of wonderful thing about this is that it does it in these kind of 5 easy steps. And I'm not going to go through each one of the steps. I'll let you do that, work through these steps on your own. But just know that I do trust and have used this these evaluation skills in other workshops and in other digital history projects. So I really do think that evaluating web pages from this perspective is a valuable way of going about doing that. If you want others, I'll link to some others on D2L, but just know that really in practice, what determines the scholarship of a website is the identification of the people that are associated with the site, their academic credentials, whether or not they can be reached or are available to answer questions, the purpose of the site. Where that purpose is clearly listed, it should tell you the site's mission, its goals, its association with specific organizations. You should be able to determine whether or not that site is for profit or not, whether it receives financial support and who's supporting it, and the extent to which it receives really the approval of its peers, right? I mean, one of the things that we look for when we're evaluating literature or written materials is often peer evaluation, right? Sources that have been vetted by other professional scholars, sources that have been highly reviewed by other scholars. That peer review section is very important, and a good website will let you know what others think about it. For example, if we went back to that visualizing emancipation site, beyond the content, what you'll see is a series of links in the upper right-hand corner that talk about the project, about the way that we can use the project, and answers a lot of the questions that I was asking in those skills for evaluating websites. So clicking on about the project shows us that this was done at the University of Richmond. It was done through the Digital Services Library. It had a grant from the National Endowment of the Humanities and a We the People grant. There's a well-written introduction to the project, as well as some content information for Scott Nesbitt, the lead researcher here. Then you also have a historical introduction, which talks about emancipation and what this map represents, leading to other sources, so these being your footnotes and those and answering those questions, as well as how the research was done, carried out, mapped, and here you see they also have footnotes. Nesbitt again writing this piece. Another really nice aspect about this is it talks about the research methods that use what each of the symbols on the maps mean. So the information that they're presenting is clear and quite well researched. It also talks about the various types of events that you'll be looking at, and then credits those who had worked on it, as well as written any aspects of it. So nice thing also is it has a bibliography down here, the sources used for its creation. And that's just in this about the projects part. There's also a lengthy section here for teachers, basically talking about how one could use this website in their class. And I think what is really interesting to me, at least about this site, is the interactivity. If you become a member of the site, you can actually add to the map. So if you were doing research on emancipation and you read a newspaper article from, let's say, 1865, and in that article there was a brief moment where they talked about an emancipation event, you can link to that emancipation event on the map yourself, write where you found the source and what the event was all about, and they'll put it on the map for they'll add to this map. So this map becomes a collaborative map all the way for educators and for researchers. The other really nice thing about it is you can actually, if you really wanted to, download their entire database at this point and do other data visualizations with this same information. So the source material is completely open on this site and can be used by anybody who wants to use it for educational purposes. So to me, I mean, this site is a perfect example of a very, very good, well-researched digital history project.